The man leading America's most powerful law enforcement agency couldn't clearly explain one of the most basic principles in our Constitution: due process. Let that sink in. At a Senate hearing with cameras rolling and the nation watching, the director of the FBI looked uncertain when asked if every person in this country is entitled to the same constitutional protections, and the senator questioning him didn't let it slide. He cut straight to the point, asking, "Have you even read the Constitution?" That moment wasn't political theater. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a crisis unfolding in plain sight, a reminder that even at the highest levels of government, the core promises of democracy can be bent, blurred, or ignored.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Director Patel. And so, as I understood it, you testified yesterday that you'd like to have another $1 billion added on to the FY25 level to do the additional work you'd like to do on drug interdiction, fentanyl in general, and anti-terrorism. And today you gave us a budget that requests cutting $500 million. Which is it? Do you want us to, what are you asking of this committee? To add funds, add $1 billion, or to cut $500 million?
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate the opportunity. What I'm asking for is that with more, I can simply do more. And I was giving examples of what more I could do. I can do the mission, and am in support of the budget here, and I'm working with appropriators and you to fill the gaps.
So you support the budget presented that cuts $500 million, but you also support us adding $1 billion should we choose to do that?
Well, I can't not support the budget as proposed, because then I would be supporting no budget.
Okay. Well, we've got those two options. We do look forward to further details from you about how you plan to modify the function of FBI on these different missions that you've highlighted today, so that we can give it the appropriate consideration. Mm-hmm. Director Patel, you're familiar with the Fifth Amendment.
Yes, Senator.
And it is really the freedom clause of the United States. It was 4 years into being a nation when Congress and the states said, hey, we have to make sure that there's not an over-aggressive government in the future that deprives us of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And you're familiar that that applies to all persons in the United States.
Yes, Senator.
So there's been a lot of concern about the several hundred immigrants who were swept off the streets of America and sent to El Salvador without due process. And does that concern you?
Senator, I'm not in a position to comment on whether or not they were given or not given due process or are supposed to be afforded due process. All the FBI did, and all the FBI will continue to do, is arrest those that have violated the law.
Okay, but to arrest, you have to investigate. Have you launched an investigation of this violation of the Freedom Clause of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, I don't know that I agree with your characterization.
Well, that was my first question, whether or not you agree with the Fifth Amendment and are prepared to defend it. It is your job to investigate crimes.
Yes, I agree with the Fifth Amendment. I agree with the entire Constitution, and the men and women at the FBI decide.
So are you going to launch an investigation of the reported violation of the due process of several hundred individuals?
Again, Senator, it's not for me to call the balls and strikes on it. The men and women at the FBI who are trained to open investigations will make those calls.
So you have no influence over whether an investigation is opened?
I have influence over it, but you're asking me a constitutional question. I'm not a constitutional scholar.
Well, it's actually not it's a question also of law.
But your position is that every one of those individuals is by constitutional right afforded due process. I don't know the answer to that. I'm telling you.
You haven't read the Constitution?
It
says all persons.
I've got it right here, but what you're saying is that every single one of the illegals that was sent down to El Salvador is supposed to be given due process pursuant.
Yeah, that's what the Constitution says. It says no person.
It doesn't say that.
It does say no person. Yeah, I'll encourage you to read it, because it's also been affirmed by the Supreme Court repeatedly. In the case of Miranda versus Arizona, held the right of all individuals, regardless of citizenship status. The Supreme Court in Reno versus Flores. I mean, but it's the plain language of the Constitution. It concerns me that you're not familiar with the core concept of due process applying to all persons as written in black and white in the Constitution.
As the first public defender who's ever served at the FBI as its director, I am more aware of due process than any predecessor in my seat. You are delineating between removal proceedings and criminal acts. My job is to investigate criminal acts. That's what we do.
You are aware that the Fifth Amendment refers to taking away liberty, and when people are arrested on the street, detained and sent out of the country, that their liberty has been taken away.
Senator, that is a constitutional question that you are asking me to answer. It's not for me to answer.
The question has already been answered by the Supreme Court that they're protected. Therefore, it's a violation of law, and it's your responsibility to open an investigation. And you're saying today you will not do so?
I am not the agency involved in removal proceedings. That is a different branch of government.
So if an agency other than the FBI violates the law and the Constitution, you will not investigate because it's a different agency?
I will investigate every violation of law.
Well, you have, but you just said you're not investigating.
No. You and I are in disagreement on what is a violation of law. I have yet to hear from the Supreme Court your position as you have adjudicated it.
Well, very, very interesting, because the Supreme Court's been very clear, and I had heard you were trained in the law, so I expected maybe you would try to uphold it. You also took an oath to the Constitution.
Thank you for the reminder.
Well, it's important to remind you, since you're apparently unfamiliar with the very basics of the core protection of freedom in our Constitution.
What I am familiar with is protecting the American public, and that's what
Let me
I'm
close
doing.
with one question, Mr. Chairman. Will you make sure that due process in every action of the FBI is completely honored under your time as director?
Will I ensure that due process is followed?
Yes.
Under the Constitution?
Completely. Send that message throughout the FBI that due process must be followed, is constitutionally required. Make sure that it's done under your direction.
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
What happened in that hearing is more than a clash of personalities. It's a warning about the fragile state of our freedoms and what can happen when those in power forget the meaning of the very oath they swore to uphold. Senator Jeff Merkley pressed the FBI Director Kash Patel in a way that should have been straightforward. The Fifth Amendment is not obscure. It's not a minor technicality buried in legal jargon. It's the backbone of our liberties, the shield that prevents government from stripping away life, liberty, or property without fair procedure. And yet Patel's response to Merkley's questions left millions of Americans stunned. He dodged, deflected, and finally admitted, "I'm not a constitutional scholar, but this wasn't an academic debate. It wasn't a law school seminar. It was a direct question to the man responsible for an agency with immense power over the lives of ordinary people. And when that man can't or won't affirm one of the most sacred principles of the Constitution, alarm bells should be ringing for everyone." Merkley didn't back off. He laid it out in black and white. He reminded Patel that the Constitution says no person, not no citizen, not no American, but no person shall be deprived of liberty without due process. That phrase was chosen deliberately by the framers. They understood that if rights could be selectively granted, they weren't really rights at all. And yet Patel, instead of acknowledging the universal nature of due process, tried to wall himself off with bureaucratic language. "It's not for me to call balls and strikes," he said, claiming it was up to others in the FBI to decide when investigations are opened. But think about that for a second. If the director of the FBI, the one at the very top, can wash his hands of responsibility by saying it's not my role, then who exactly is responsible? And if the most fundamental protections in the Constitution can be brushed aside as someone else's problem, what does that mean for the rest of us? The specific issue Merkley raised makes this even more urgent. He asked about reports that hundreds of immigrants were swept off the streets and deported to El Salvador without hearings. No judge, no chance to defend themselves, just taken and removed. That's not an abstract debate. Those are human lives. People who came here often fleeing danger, chasing hope, or simply seeking opportunity. Some may have violated laws, yes, but the Constitution doesn't say protections apply only when convenient. It doesn't say rights vanish based on where you were born. It says no person. That's the standard. That's the promise. And Patel, rather than affirming that promise, claimed he wasn't in a position to comment. Imagine that, the director of the FBI unwilling to say whether the Constitution should be followed. This is how freedoms erode. Not always with dramatic announcements or sweeping decrees, but with the quiet technical deflections of officials who say, "That's not my job." Bureaucracy becomes the shield for inaction, and every erosion of rights in history starts with this pattern. Power finds excuses, Agencies point fingers. Leaders claim ignorance. Meanwhile, the people who depend on those rights the most, often the most vulnerable, are left unprotected. Merkley saw through it, and that's why his questioning mattered. Because it wasn't just about one deportation or one hearing, it was about whether the government still recognizes that the Constitution applies equally to all. One of the most striking moments came when Patel, under pressure, said he had the Constitution right here. He literally held it up as if possessing the document was proof enough of understanding it. But there's a world of difference between holding the Constitution and upholding it. Plenty of people in power wave it around, quote its lines, even use it as a prop. But the real test is whether they follow it when it's inconvenient, when it challenges their own power, when it demands accountability. Merkley's retort, "That's what the Constitution says. I encourage you to read it," was more than a clapback. It was a reminder that knowing the words means nothing if you don't live by their intent, and that's the bigger danger. When the head of the FBI can't affirm something as basic as due process, we should all be alarmed, because the erosion of rights never stops with one group. Today it's immigrants swept off the streets, tomorrow it could be protesters, next week journalists, and eventually it could be anyone. The Constitution doesn't protect groups selectively, it protects the principle of justice itself. Once that principle is compromised, everyone is vulnerable. That's why this hearing should be a wake-up call. It forces us to ask, are we slowly normalizing a system where expediency trumps legality, where the government gets to decide who deserves rights and who doesn't? If so, then the promise of equal protection is at risk for all of us. Merkley's persistence in that hearing was more than political theater. It was a defense of democracy itself. He wasn't just standing up for those deported without hearings. He was standing up for the integrity of the rule of law. And his frustration was palpable, because what he faced wasn't a misunderstanding, it was resistance. The kind of resistance that cloaks itself in procedure and technicalities but hides a deeper truth, that power is often uncomfortable with accountability. Every time Patel dodged, every time he said "not my role," he revealed just how fragile the commitment to constitutional principles can be inside the halls of government. Think about what that means beyond this one hearing. If the FBI director can dismiss due process as a constitutional question not for me to answer, what else can be ignored? What other protections can be brushed aside under the guise of technicality? The Constitution isn't a menu where officials pick and choose which rights to honor. It's a contract, a moral covenant between the people and their government. And when leaders fail to honor it, it's not just the individuals in question who lose, it's all of us. Because the moment rights become conditional, they stop being rights at all. And that's why this exchange should matter to you, no matter who you are or where you stand politically. Due process isn't about left or right, it's about the rule of law versus the rule of power. It's about ensuring that no one, citizen or not, can be stripped of liberty without fairness. That principle protects immigrants, yes, but it also protects citizens. It protects anyone who might one day find themselves accused, detained, or targeted. Which means it protects you. When Patel failed to affirm that principle, he wasn't just undermining immigrants' rights, he was weakening the very safeguard that protects every American. This is the moment when we have to pay attention. It's easy to scroll past hearings, to dismiss them as political theater, to assume they don't matter. But what we saw in this exchange was more than partisan sparring. It was a test of whether the most basic promise of our Constitution still holds. And if the head of the FBI can't affirm it, then it's up to the public to demand it. Because democracy doesn't survive on autopilot. It survives when people are willing to defend it, when they refuse to look away, when they hold power accountable. Merkley did that in the hearing room. The question is, will we do it outside of it? So here's the takeaway. Every time you hear about due process, don't tune it out as legal jargon. Recognize it for what it is, the guarantee that stands between you and unchecked power, the principle that ensures fairness for everyone, no matter who they are. And remember that every attempt to deny it to one group sets a precedent to deny it to another. That's why Merkley's questioning matters. That's why this hearing matters. And that's why staying engaged matters. If you believe in protecting the rule of law, if you believe justice and democracy are only as strong as our willingness to defend them, then don't just watch moments like this and move on. Stay engaged. Subscribe, keep watching, keep questioning, because understanding these moments isn't about partisanship, it's about preserving the very idea of America. And that, more than anything else, is why this conversation matters.